Fantastic. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this workshop, which is titled Understanding and Supporting LGBT+ Veterans. My name's Anna Marie Tipping, and I'm the Underrepresented Groups Project Lead for the Veterans Covenant Healthcare Alliance, and I'm delighted to be hosting Fighting with Pride, the UK's only LGBT+ veterans charity, who will be taking us through today's workshop. Just some housekeeping before we start. This event is going to be recorded and will be uploaded to the VCHA YouTube channel. This link is going to be sent out to all participants who registered and attended today. Your microphones and cameras have been switched off, but we have enabled the Q&A function for you to place your questions. I will ask these at the end of the workshop, and I do encourage you to please use these functions. Any questions we may not have time to answer, they will be asked later and added to the recording. I'm going to give a brief introduction overview of Veteran Aware accreditation and why this workshop is so important when we talk about removing disadvantage for the armed forces community alongside raising standards for all. Being veteran aware isn't just being aware of the existence of veterans in our armed forces community. It's also about being aware of ourselves. When we deliver, maintain, update, commission and create new services, are we actively including the unique challenges faced by this community? Are we aware that veterans are not a homogenous group? They do not look or act the same. They do not come from the same places with the same concerns, backgrounds and histories. Are we aware that every person who walks through our doors could be members of the armed forces community? Are we paying due regard to understand that the armed forces are only as effective if it represents the country and the communities it swears to protect? To be accredited as veteran aware, each organisation must meet a set of rigorous standards, and these standards are overseen by a national steering group of stakeholders, and each submission is reviewed and evidenced thoroughly. By attending the workshop today, you can evidence in your accreditation, review or re-accreditation that you are working to continuously meet those standards. The organisation complies with the Armed Forces Covenant, is trained and educated in the needs of the armed forces community, actively raises awareness of the community, and is aware and can refer to services and organisations who can support the armed forces. By attending today's workshop, you're working to meet these 5 of the 8 standards required to meet accreditation. And please let your lead in your organisation aware of you attending today so they can evidence this when working with the VCHA. By understanding more about underrepresented groups who sit within the armed forces community, the VCHA works hard to give you the resources you need to make every contact count and to get it right first time. Being veteran aware doesn't work in a silo, and it's only through the work, through collaboration between organisations, departments and services, and it's through that lens that we're able to hold this workshop today. So I would like to hand you over to Caroline Paige, Chief Executive of Fighting with Pride, Craig Jones, Executive Chair of Fighting with Pride, and Dave Small, the Pride in Veteran Standards Manager with Fighting with Pride. Thank you all for your time, for your attendance, and I hand over to them now.
Thank you so much for inviting us along today. It's absolutely brilliant to talk to you. And there's some poignancy in this day. You couldn't have chosen a better day for us to come and talk to you, because this morning, the General Medical Council made a heartfelt apology for its own actions historically in investigating and dismissing members of its association. It investigated over 40 cases and removed 8 doctors from the medical register simply for being themselves. We've worked closely with with GLAD to help ease this along, but we congratulate them on their work to achieve this fantastic goal. These are things that are historic, but they should never have happened. And as we're going to talk in a few moments, the impact and the pain endures. But back to the message of the day and the introductions. Hello, I'm Craig Jones. I'm the Executive Chair of Fighting with Pride, an organisation I lead with our fantastic Chief Executive, Caroline Paige, who joins me today. I'll just let Caroline just say a quick hi.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I'm Caroline Paige, the Chief Executive of Fighting with Pride.
Brilliant. We are a lived experience organisation. So Caroline and I are going to start by telling you a little bit about our past, to give a little bit of an insight into the circumstances of the ban from our personal stories, and also perhaps the impact and a highlight and a touch of the damage done. Although I have to say, Caroline and I were fortunate in that our careers survived despite the strange land that we lived in the 1980s and the 1990s. In addition to my time in the service, I also ran a complex needs mental health service, CQC registered, for individuals stepping down from low secure environments directly into the community. And I'm a former board member of Brighton and Sussex University Healthcare's NHS Trust. But that wasn't where I started. As a youth, I wanted to do nothing other than join the Royal Navy. My uncle had served just after the Second World War. It was enough to make us a military family, and I was really excited about the potential of a career. So I went for my first Admiralty Interview Board assessment at the age of 17, 3-day, absolutely bloody terrifying assessment, and I failed miserably. In fact, the Commodore of the board said, "We don't see you as a naval officer now, Mr. Jones, or at any time in the future." And nothing galvanized me more that I was going to achieve that than those moments with the Commodore of the Admiralty Board. So my parents said, "Look, get close to the Navy, learn more about it." So I went to Portsmouth University and did my degree there and did exactly that. I learned everything I could learn about ships and aircrafts and missiles. And I went back to the Admiralty Board in my final year and passed. And during that interview, I sat down with a female personnel selection officer who was deliberately in civilian clothing to give some sense of ease. And I remember the question. And the question was, "Do you know anybody who's gay?" And I was ready for it because I knew it was coming. And luckily, I was able to answer honestly and said, "No, I've never met anybody who's gay. I actually had nothing to hide other than my innermost thoughts." And she said, "What would you do if you met somebody?" And I cringed at my response. I said, "I'd run in the other direction," which is, I suppose, what you say when you're 20 and a bit naive. But either way, I walked through the main gates of Britannia Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, on the 13th of September 1989. You never forget the day that you joined up. And I left my sexual orientation at the main gate. It had no place in the armed forces that it's such that I could be accepted. And it was toxic to the career that I hoped for. And I passed out of Dartmouth and had the most amazing 5 years of my career, a real boy's own experience. I flew straight out to the Caribbean and was a counter-narcotics boarding officer for a while. I retrained in helicopter fast rope insertion, and which is really bad for your knees, clinicians. If you really don't want to do that for too long, as I've discovered at the age of 55. But I really enjoyed it. It was very exciting, and my teams led the clearing of the Shatt al Arab waterway in 1993 after the first Gulf War to check for bombs and guns and trafficking and that sort of stuff. And then I went out to Northern Ireland, and I was a patrol commander in South Down for a couple of years, bridging the Good Friday Agreement. So I got to see Northern Ireland as it moved from the despair of decades of the Troubles to the hope that the Good Friday Agreement brought to the good people of Northern Ireland. A really exciting time. But I was conscious towards the end of my time there that there was a clock ticking in my mind. And I knew that I was about to find myself. I did an armed boarding off the coast of Bangor in the autumn of 1994. And as we were approaching it, I was with an RU's Royal Ulster Constabulary officer. And we felt that something was wrong. There was nobody on the deck. We hailed them, nobody moved. And we climbed on board and we heard scurrying down below. And we both pulled our pistols. And the brave sergeant said to the young lieutenant, you stick your head down the hatch, sir, and I'll cover you. So foolishly I did. And I pointed my pistol through the hatch, and there were two older teenage lads on a mattress in each other's arms. And I felt instantly protective, and I had body armor on. So, and this, of course, was way before the age of consent was reduced. So I filled the hatch, hid sight of them, and beckoned them with my pistol to get their kit on, which they did. And they came up into the well deck, looking slightly tousled, and we questioned them, as you did in Northern Ireland, and asked them what they were doing, and they wisely said that they'd been resting because they'd been fishing. And just as we were about to leave, the sergeant turned round and said, "Where's the fish?" And of course, there were no fish on this fishing boat, and they said that they'd actually been mending nets. But I went back to my cabin and held my head in my hands, and just felt truly ashamed of the fact that what I'd just seen was two young men in the most difficult of circumstances, young, gay, Northern Ireland, the Troubles, and they were trying to live their best lives, and I felt like an utter sham, not least against the backdrop of what I saw as the true values and standards of our armed forces, which somehow were underpinned by truth and honesty. So I came back to the UK at the end of my tour, and a couple of weeks into my leave, I walked into my first gay bar in Exeter, and with the efficiency that you would expect from a Royal Naval officer, I sat down next to the man who has been my husband or boyfriend for the last 30 years. And that was a moment where life turned from monochrome to true technicolor. As you might imagine, never please have your first partner at the age of 26. It's ridiculous, and a crisis that should be done at 13 or 14 or something. But it just made things amazing, but also a very dark shadow cast over me from that day, because the 5 years that followed, I would spend hiding from the Royal Military Police. Because if they'd caught me in 1996, I would have been arrested, interrogated, and I mean interrogated. I would have been taken to court-martial, and at court-martial found guilty of the criminal offence of homosexuality. This is 1996, not 66. My skin cream's not that good. And it was just a frightening prospect. My parents had had amazing hopes for my career. They'd been deeply shocked when I'd told them that I was gay. And it was just a dreadful time. And, you know, I survived as best I could in those years, but it came to a head later in 97 when I was navigating the frigate HMS Sheffield, due to take her out of harbour in the January, and my husband, then boyfriend's father, suddenly dropped dead. We were both young. He was 19, wasn't coping well. He had to stop college, and it was just chaotic. And I knew that I would sail Sheffield out of harbour, but instinctively I knew that I wouldn't bring her back. And the life of this young lieutenant collapsed, and I was emergency casualty evacuated to Derriford about 8 hours after we sailed, in a complete mess. But somehow, and they sedated me for a couple of days, and luckily by the time I woke up, I realised that I needed to work fast to make sure that they didn't find out. And I managed to convince them that it was a crisis of professional confidence. And I survived with a black mark, because in those days a mental health issue was not great for the career of a young officer. But I fought my way back, and they sent me to an aircraft carrier to sharpen pencils for the navigator, and I thought, well, if they're going to send me to do that, I'm going to sharpen them bloody well. And eventually I ended up on a ship with an amazing captain, HMS Invincible, Admiral Roy Clare, who recognised the fact that people should be supported to be the best version of themselves. And I waited until the ban was lifted. I wasn't caught, thankfully. And on the day that the ban was lifted, I came out of my closet like an absolute rocket, recognizing the fact that it was time to be honest. It was time for there to be role models for a community that had hid in the shadows, and for those who had been lucky enough to survive. But I also recognized a sense of duty and responsibility to the incredibly brave men and women who fought for that ban to be lifted. They fought tooth and nail. They took it through every court in the United Kingdom. They took it to the European Court of Justice and ultimately to the European Court of Human Rights. And they preserved the opportunity for people like Dave and Caroline and I to serve in the armed forces and to have the careers that we wanted and to protect the United Kingdom's peace and freedom, freedoms that we were ourselves denied. And I couldn't have been more proud to be part of those changes. Now, I'll tell you more about our organisation and the amazing community that we serve in a little while, but I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who has a remarkable story of being the first amongst equals as the UK's first transgender officer. I think I've just stolen one of the lines from her amazing story, but over to you, Caroline.
Thanks, Craig. We never get much time really to go into the detail of our stories, although they are available in the book that Craig created called Fighting with Pride. So if you wanted any more information on that time period and the transformation of the armed forces, please do dig out a copy. But in that you'll see that actually Craig, if there's one person in the whole of the armed forces that stepped out on day one and then led the change of inclusion within the armed forces, it was Craig. So I had my own battles to fight. I grew up in a military family, and my dad was in the army, and I spent most of my young years in Germany and Malaysia. And it was whilst I was in Malaysia that I became aware of my gender identity, and I became aware that my gender identity conflicted with everybody else's expectations. And so when I presented this dilemma to my dad, it didn't go down very well at all. And I got a response which over time I would get to know was influenced by him being in the armed forces at the time, having been a boy soldier and being influenced by the culture such that he wasn't in a position to support somebody in his own family who was LGBT plus. So that's, the impact it has on individuals, not just those that are serving who happen to be LGBT plus. So I had to hide who I was. It didn't mean my feelings and my thoughts went away, even though I was told it was not acceptable and made to feel ashamed of being who I was. That's part of who you are. It's your identity. It doesn't go away. And it wasn't until I got my dad left the army and retired into Cheshire, and I had a fascination with aeroplanes, so I joined the Air Cadets. And I found myself as a 15-year-old being allowed to go solo in a glider, which is quite scary. But I was up at 2,000 feet on a blue sky day over Chester, looking into North Wales, thinking, wow. My only concern at that time in my head was how I was going to get down. Fortunately, they taught me how to do that, but it gave me a bug. I'd been bitten by the flying bug and I wanted to do more. But not only that, it took away a huge focus, so that I was able to sort of ignore my own conflicting thoughts and focus on something that I really enjoyed. So I applied for a powered flying course, and at the age of 17, and went off to Cambridge. I won the scholarship, went off to Cambridge, and came back with a private pilot's license, but with no money to do anything about it, no money to fly. So I started looking around for options, and the only option I could think of, could see that opened up was the armed forces. But I knew from having seen the armed forces that I grew up with, that wasn't going to be acceptable. I wasn't going to be accepted in there as me, so I'd have to hide who I was. But I've been doing that pretty much all my life anyway, and I couldn't see a way forward, so I joined. And I found myself as a navigator on fast jet aircraft during the Cold War. We were air defence. I was based out of RAF Lucas up in Scotland. We would scramble regularly to intercept Soviet long-range bombers, always testing our defences and our reactions in those days. And it was a high-pressure job. It was real Top Gun stuff. and it was hugely high pressure. But on top of that pressure, I had what was going on in my head, realizing that my life was moving forward professionally, but not personally. And I had to live two lives, and I had to live. I was able to, with the income, obviously, afford rent or accommodation. And so I lived two lives where I would go home, lock the doors, close the curtains, and relax and just be Caroline, and occasionally explore dangerous opportunities to go out. But when I went to work, I had to put on the image that everybody expected from me. And never the two worlds could cross, because in those days, nobody understood the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation, and nobody still does. The ban was called the gay ban because LGBT plus didn't exist in those days, and the armed forces had a wide idea of what being gay was. And so anybody who was trans was wrapped up in the ban also, and would be seen as a gay man who wanted to wear a dress, for instance. And therefore the consequences were that I would be thrown out, that I'd be dismissed from service, I'd lose my income, therefore my sanctuary. I knew I'd lose my parents and my family. I knew I'd lose my friends. Everything would come crashing down. So that puts an extra huge burden of mental health challenges on your plate. At the end of the Cold War, I ended up switching to helicopters, tactical trooping helicopters, and I went out to Northern Ireland and Bosnia. And while I was in Bosnia and seeing the destruction there, I was with the Royal Marines Ground Force Unit on the ground in Bosnia in '95, and I was seeing that all the destruction and stuff around me, and it was a realization that you only live one life. And when I put that to my own predicament, and I realized that I do only get one life, and I need to sort my life out, I need to do something about it. But I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to lose my friends. I didn't want to lose my family. And so I sat on it for a few years until I found my way onto hormones. And then I realized that I needed to really do something about this. I went outside Defence Medical because obviously as aircrew you weren't encouraged to do that because they had to have a good idea of your medical status at all times, and it was frowned upon to go externally for medical support. But I did, because I knew if I went to my medical officer, that would be the end of my career and everything would come crashing down. So I built up assessments through a gender identity specialist, and I decided to approach it to the Air Force on a medical background, from a medical place. But the danger of that was everybody would then think mental health, and that somebody like me wasn't fit to be in the armed forces for mental health reasons. So anyway, I walked into a medical officer's appointment with a big portfolio of stuff. This is 98 into 99, so 99 I had the appointment. And there was no internet and web and things as such in those days, or resources other than what I could find. But my medical officer, I told her that I wanted to stay in the Air Force, but I wanted to transition gender. And she cleared her desk for the rest of the day, and we sat down, we talked about it. And we came up with the plan, revised the plan that I already had. And then she, on my behalf, spoke with medical policy. She spoke with legal policy. She spoke with the base commander, and they got involved with employment policy and everything that was policy. And the decision came back that I could stay in service. And this was absolutely incredible. And so I was allowed to transition. I was taken off flying duties for 18 months for the transition period, because they still weren't sure about the mental health aspects and all the medical aspects of being on hormones. And so they were learning as I was learning. But what I found, that as soon as I stepped out, this was still in '99, and the ban was still in place, and there was no education process. Nobody had been told about accepting trans people in service. So I stepped into a whole world of prejudice and discrimination, and people coming up to me and telling me that I didn't belong there. Fortunately, I built up a really good team of colleagues. I went back to flying duties, and I set out to show them that they were all wrong, and that, you know, I had a place in the armed forces. I had a whole load of skill, a whole load of background which was relevant. And it cost me a lot of money, or it cost the Air Force a lot of money to get me all of that. So I dug in, and with the help of colleagues and friends, I survived all of that prejudice, and I went out to Iraq and Afghanistan, many times and won awards out there, credited. I was a tactics and platform protection specialist, and I was credited with helping keep people safe out there flying on the aircraft. And that made people realize that I was just a person in the armed forces that could do a job. Why should it matter my background as long as I'm there to do the job? And so I saw attitudes change through that period. I served for 16 years openly as Caroline, and I saw things change. And it was really the things that Craig is going to talk about now. I'm going to hand back to him. Just for interest, sorry, the other face you can see on screen is Dave Small. He's going to be speaking to you shortly about Pride in Veterans Standard. He's our manager there. Hand back to Craig, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about actually what happened to those individuals who weren't so lucky as we were.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Absolutely brilliant. And we're going to go through this with you with a bit of a deck of slides just to illustrate a little of the story. But while Caroline works the magic with the technology, Fighting with Pride began as an anthology book in 2019. If you ever get bored in your life and want it to become exciting, write a book because I don't think we've ever looked back. And I brought together 10 amazing people, including Caroline, who I'd met on this journey and who had an important story to tell. And by the time that we'd finished putting the book together, we were angry. We were angry not for ourselves, because in Caroline and my case, we had survived the ban and we'd served for quite a substantial number of years after the ban was lifted. But what hadn't happened was that nobody had gone back to find those who were not so lucky. The serving communities, the veterans organisations, nobody. And what we had discovered while putting the book together was that the consequences for individuals have been very, very severe. So let me take a look now with you at the history of the ban. So the ban, in a way, crystallised in 1967 by the instigation of the Sexual Offences Act. That followed an investigation by Lord Wolfenden almost a decade earlier, in which he perceived that it was right in the future for homosexuality to be decriminalised. And the Sexual Offences Act did exactly that. It decriminalised homosexuality, but not for everybody. Specific exclusions remained in place for members of the armed forces and members of the Merchant Navy. And in 1967, at the beginnings of that instigation, the ban, I don't think, was enforced vociferously. However, as the Cold War took hold, and in the decades that followed, it would be. Part of the justification for the ban was to do with security, to do with the fact that people could be bribed and people could be extorted. And I say that with some irony, because in the last few years of my career, I was a signals intelligence officer and security cleared to cabinet office level, which really just demonstrates how ridiculous the policy was. The best way to make people a target for extortion was to give them an Achilles heel, something to hide. The ban in the 1980s was particularly harshly enforced, and some of the investigations were truly horrendous. And I'll talk in a few moments about the impact upon people's lives. But in 1991, a group of individuals who had been affected by the ban and had been dismissed or removed or constructively dismissed got together to form an organisation called Rank Outsiders. And one of those individuals, Ed Hall, created the Armed Forces Legal Challenge Group, which would champion the cause of legal challenge against the ban, which was seen as against the grain of the values of the armed forces. And a really courageous group of what I'd call Davids lined up to the Goliath of the Ministry of Defence and the government, and they took the case through all of the UK courts, ultimately finding themselves initially at the European Court of Justice in 1997-98 with the case of MacDonald versus the United Kingdom, and ultimately at the European Court of Human Rights in September 99, with Lustig, Preen and Beckett versus the United Kingdom. And it was a narrow case, but it won through. And I remember listening to the BBC announcement as I sat in the wardroom of our carrier HMS Invincible, and experiencing the beginnings of hope. But it was not clear that the UK would accept the European Court's ruling until well into the autumn. So there was an agonising wait until the ban was lifted on the 12th of January 2000. But that was not a day in which there were champagne corks and streamers anywhere in the armed forces or in the Ministry of Defence. People like Caroline and I and Dave. Dave was one of the very first warrant officer in the armed forces to come out. Came out into a septic environment and a communities of the armed forces that had been indoctrinated to be deeply suspicious about people like us. So it was a tough time and very, very difficult. But we campaigned and we kept campaigning. And I chained myself to a wide variety of railings in Whitehall and wrote an awful lot of emails to very senior people, none of which had a place alongside Queen's regulations. And change started to happen. And by 1995, we had become the first armed forces in the world to march in Pride. We had employee network groups in all three of the armed forces. And we were outrageously putting recruiting adverts in publications like Diva and Attitude and Gay Times. And I think what we would say is that today, Fighting with Pride is immensely proud of the serving communities of the armed forces. LGBT plus personnel serve at the front line of operations all over the world. They do a great job and they're supported at every level of command. And they're adding to the fighting efficiency of the armed forces. No workplace in the UK is ever perfect, but I think what we're proud of is that if somebody holds up their hand and says, this isn't right, then they almost certainly will get a proper investigation and checked, which is a real achievement. But there's so much work left to do for those who were most affected by the ban. Caroline and I gave evidence after forming the charity. Caroline and I gave evidence to the Select Committee on the Armed Forces Bill in May 2021, which galvanised what would become the LGBT Veterans Independent Review. In honesty, the MPs that sat around the table were deeply shocked to hear about the fact that we had a group of veterans who had been treated so appallingly and remained isolated and beyond the boundaries of the military family, isolated deliberately and uniquely with nothing done for them for decades. Some of them had turned up on the doors of military charities in the 80s and 90s and been turned away in their despair and disgrace and discomfort because they had been dismissed in disgrace. Shame on the charities in those days, but I'm delighted to say that the response that they get from military charities and support providers today is very, very different, and that's what Pride in Veteran Standard is all about. Next slide, please, Caroline. Thank you. So let's just talk a little bit about what I had feared, but what others experienced. The military police were actively searching for people, certainly for the last 3 decades of the 20th century. They had special units of the Special Investigation Branch that monitored gay pubs with cameras and which hunted people down. The investigations were cruel and harsh. People very rarely had briefs. There were interrogations, and if you were lucky, you were forced to resign during those interrogations, handed a piece of paper and a pen, and instructed to write something that would allow them to remove you from the armed forces. If you weren't lucky, it was court-martial, charges, and a prison sentence. And ultimately, people were either discharged in disgrace, dismissed in disgrace, or discharged, service no longer required. All those things ended up on people's service personnel records. Some of them resulted in criminal records. And I remember talking to a veteran last year who had always wanted through his whole life to work with learning disabilities, but had not been able to do so because of a charge. And as soon as that charge was removed by a royal pardon, just after the pandemic, he got a job as a caretaker in a learning disabilities home. I spoke to him on the day that he got that job, and it was a very memorable conversation. Next slide, please, Caroline. Thank you. So what were the consequences? What has caused the extremely high prevalence of mental health issues in this community that we see? What were those circumstances? Well, people were forcibly removed from the armed forces family. They lost their oppos, they lost their mates, they lost people who they had served with alongside in the Falklands War, in Iraq, and in Northern Ireland, and in many other circumstances. For many, they lost their own families. Certainly, my parents had great difficulty coming to terms with the fact that I was gay, and anybody who came from a military family would have come from within that indoctrination system. So many people found themselves with no home to go back to. Outing caused an immediate crisis of housing and income through loss of employment. Many people were no longer able to work in the careers that they'd chosen. For example, if they were medical doctors, people lost their right and entitlement to pensions because there are pension points in the service. You have to have served a certain number of years. And in some cases, the SIB accelerated dismissal of people to make sure that they didn't get to those pension points. They lost their service identity. Court-martial military medals, including operational medals, for example, for service in the Falklands, were ceremonially ripped from people's uniforms. They lost their respect, their pride, their dignity, and their trust. And for many, the point of leaving the service was the beginning of a lifetime of mental health problems and crisis caused particularly by the loss of self-esteem and by an enduring embitterment that surrounds the sense of injustice, that they'd stepped forward in the service of the United Kingdom, they'd stepped forward to protect our peace and our freedoms, of which they were themselves robbed. Next slide, please, Caroline. Thank you. So what do we do? Fighting with Pride was set up to provide support and relief for this amazing community of individuals. We recognised the fact that we needed to work in the arena of policy. It's a challenging area because organisations like, for example, the Ministry of Defence were not keen to look back over the experiences of what happened prior to the lifting of the ban. However, I think that there has been a realisation that something needed to be done, and we now work side by side with the Ministry of Defence on the reparations process. And in the majority of areas, we found consensus, and they're supporting us to put in place, or we're supporting them to put in place measures that can start to bring self-esteem back to this amazing community. We're building capacity. So through the Pride in Veteran Standard, we're working with an army of LGBT plus positive organisations, including the military charities. And in honesty, in many of the military charities that we've spoken to, we got the absolute opposite response to what we expected. It's almost as though they'd said, "Gaze, where have you been for the last 20 years? Really exciting to see their enthusiasm to create that LGBT plus warm welcome and that fantastic support and care proposition. But in honesty, there is a naivety, because many people that work in military charities come from the military family and served during the years of the ban. So there's something to be done to build their confidence, to build their toolkit, to make sure that they're using all of the right words. I can't tell you how many different ways I've heard LGBT plus said, or how many B's and F's come into that. But you know, once people can say the stuff right, then and they can understand the agenda and understand why that warm welcome is needed, then at that moment we find ourselves able to connect the veterans in, knowing that they will find people who genuinely want to help and won't inadvertently cause upset. We provide direct support to the community. In our experience, nothing makes our veterans more comfortable and feel better than being able to talk to people who truly understand what they've been through in their lives. And that's one of the most important things that we enable. And we know that we need to be evidence-led. So we have a research project at Northumbria University that has looked into what happened back in the day, because institutionally, the ban has not been well remembered for reasons which you might understand. It looks upon what the immediate impact was upon the veterans historically, and what the through life impact has been, how they live their lives today, how is their health and well-being, what are their circumstances of finance and housing, and what we need to do to create fantastic services that can support them in the future. We are, to an extent, a campaigning organisation. It's really important that there is full reparation for the individuals affected by the ban, and our appearance before the Select Committee was just the beginning. As a result of that appearance, in January 2022, the Prime Minister announced LGBT Veterans Independent Review, and later that year he announced that the chair would be Lord Etherton. And I have to say, we have been incredibly impressed with Lord Etherton's work. He's a former Master of the Rolls who is himself gay, and on his appointment to be the Master of the Rolls, he said, "I need to let you know that it is my duty to tell you to come out." And I think if there's one word that this community understands very well, it's the word duty. He gathered his evidence in the independent review painstakingly. 1,128 individuals gave evidence to that review. And amazingly, a significant number of those were clinicians who in the years of the ban had been forced to do intimate inspections of veterans who were being accused of being homosexual, individuals who hated going through that process and saw it as a breach of the Hippocratic Oath. And their evidence was very, very important, and we're grateful for that. The report was published in July last year, and on the occasion of the report being published, the Prime Minister made an apology on behalf of the nation state, which was what the government said was the most important thing that they wanted. Sorry, what the community said was the most important thing that they wanted. They wanted that moment of contrition. And Rishi Sunak referred to the horrendous physical violence and sexual abuse that many of those caught up in the years of the ban faced. Because, of course, anything could be done to somebody who was LGBT plus because they had no voice. If you spoke up about things that had happened to you, you would be removed, possibly imprisoned. You were the guilty person, not the person who did something to you. And I'm sure you can imagine in those circumstances what a cruel impact that had upon people's health and well-being. In December this year, there was a statement in the House of Commons, and that has heralded the beginnings of the reparations process, which I'll talk about in a few moments. Fantastic. So I talked about us being evidence-led. Our first research paper was published last year, Lost and Found, and that provided an account of 112 veterans and what they had experienced and the impact has been. And we're using that report to help us support brilliant organisations providing veterans services so that they can have an appreciation of what this community's living ways are today and also what services can help them. And you can see there also the final report and the analysis report of the LGBT Veterans Independent Review. Those are both available online and really do give a unvarnished account of the ban and its impact. So I really do commend those documents to you. There's some statistics there which I'll let you read from our Lost and Found report. I think probably the first one is the most important one. 80% of LGBT plus veterans feel that dismissal because of their orientation or gender had a significant impact upon their mental health. But the rest of the statistics also demonstrate the impact that there has been upon how people feel about themselves and the world around them. So in the reparations process, there were 49 recommendations and 28 suggestions. The recommendations have a very wide range. So some of them, in fact, a significant number of them, are to do with self-esteem. They're to do with washing people clean of the shame that they have felt for decades and restoring their honour and their pride in their service. Because believe me, those who were dismissed in disgrace have lost that pride and that sense of honour. So things like presenting people with berets so that they can march in the National Service of Remembrance, welcoming them back into veterans organisations are really, really important. And not least, restoring their operational service medals for the most difficult times of their lives when they faced conflict or military operations. Those medals should never have been taken. In the majority of those reparations, fantastic progress is being made. However, we are concerned, being open with you, about the fact that financial recompense is not being progressed as we would wish it to be. I mentioned to you that perhaps the most important of the reparations was the first one, the apology by the Prime Minister. Caroline and I were pleased to be in the Cabinet Office with a large group of veterans when that apology was made, and it was a truly heartwarming moment. There was, for some people, joy. For others, there was a great deal of tears. But it was a moment in which, in my own mind's eye, as somebody who's worked in mental health services, I thought perhaps this is now a moment when a much stalled recovery for this community at an individual level can begin. Maybe perhaps now people can feel sufficient sense of justice and hope that they can look back upon what happened to them and find their peace and reconciliation with their own past. Because it's my belief that for many that's needed. For some, I think they'll never wish to open that box, and we can only understand what the impact has been of the repression that they felt over those years. So just before I hand over to Caroline, let me talk about the financial award recommendation. Recommendations 28 and 29. After the apology, this is the most important reparation for the veterans, not for the sake of compensation, but for two reasons, really. I think one is because financial recompense will bring a sense of justice for all that has been lost by this community. And most importantly, it will achieve equality. The work that we do is not about LGBT plus rights. It's about equality, and it's about how we want veterans in the United Kingdom to live, particularly in their later lives. We want them to enjoy peace and security and a sense of belonging and community. And for this community, there has been the impoverishment of lost careers, of transient lives, of not having proper housing. And that needs to be restored by proper financial recompense, such that people can enjoy holidays, that can have the opportunity of socializing with veterans who understand their journey without worrying about the cost of train fares, and so that they can have some security around their own accommodation. And we are campaigning very hard, and you probably saw us last week in the national press, and this week, and we'll be in the national press again next week, talking about the fact that this amazing community of veterans deserve to be able to put this behind them and feel as though the government has recognised not just that apology was due and that damage has been done, but also that something needs to be done to make sure that these veterans are lifted up from the despair and the circumstances that they've experienced. Let me hand over now to Caroline to tell you a little bit more about our journey and the work that we do.
Great, thank you. So all of the reparations recommendations that Craig has mentioned and more are included in those documents that he spoke of earlier, which you can get from our website and also from the government website. But we wanted to just focus on some of the recommendations which impacted the NHS. And there was quite a few of those. The NHS England was our earliest partner, and when we set out as Fighting with Pride, if we hadn't had that initial support from NHS England, it would have been a longer journey. So we're ever grateful for that. And as a consequence of that, we're aware that the NHS is quite well advanced in a lot of the recommendations that the report has put out there, and there's work in progress on the others. So some of those reparations we've put down the right-hand side there is the actual text from within the document on mental health and physical welfare. And I've put this first page up there is about training within the NHS and the RGCP accreditation to make sure that the organisations and service providers, clinicians, and anybody really that works within the NHS has an inclusive and is very aware of the impacts of the ban, the history of why somebody who's LGBT plus might have additional challenges which are preventing them from talking about other health matters. There's also within the VCHA partners, NHSE, ICBs and the RCGP to explore ways to encourage more practices to become veteran friendly accredited. And I saw Guy Benson on the call earlier. I saw his name pop up and was delighted that he's doing a lot of work in all of this. And also alongside the Veteran Aware programme, it's about promoting primary care providers to use standards to demonstrate a visible welcome. Dave's going to talk about our Pride in Veteran standard. There's the LGBT Foundation Pride in Practice standard, which is an LGBT specific standard. And there's a big difference between LGBT plus veterans and LGBT inclusion, which you probably will have understood from what Craig and I have been talking about. Yes, we're talking about LGBT plus individuals, but they have a unique background, and actually LGBT plus veterans for quite some time weren't welcome within the LGBT plus community either. So it's important that people understand that they are LGBT, but also they're veterans, and it's the veterans and LGBT aspect which needs to be more aware of. And of course, there's a recommendation that NHS England or the ICBs consider commissioning all of this as well. There's the VHCA accreditation, which demonstrates LGBT plus inclusion, but also on top of that, as I said, it's the veteran aspects of the ban history awareness and the impacts of the ban and the extra challenges that placed on mental health and also isolation and not coming forward. The report asked for NHS trusts to have 100% sign up. Not there yet, of course, but moving in a really positive direction. But also to encourage care homes and hospices where a lot of LGBT veterans may be. We haven't been able to reach out to those spaces yet, so it's about raising awareness within there as well. Rainbow Badge, since Lord Efferton's report has come to an end, I believe it's not being supported anymore, that idea of having the Rainbow Badge, but there was an idea that it should run alongside the VCHA awareness standard. Of course, the Pride in Veterans standard is in effect a rainbow badge, so there's room for the rainbow still to be displayed, because all of the work that we do as a charity for LGBT plus veterans does raise awareness of LGBT matters and things like that. So it's a really good way to a good thing to consider the Pride in Veterans standard as an indicator of inclusion. Addiction services need to be aware of the ban history and consequences as well, and Op Courage, just for awareness of more awareness, and they are working on that. We work with an awful lot of the Op Courage teams, and I'm sure that they're on board here today as well. We've had a fantastic response from Op Courage teams, and they are working on these things. So as I say, a lot of the recommendations in there are already underway. They just need to be made aware wider, really. And the NHS should develop and fund training assessments for care providers that aren't part of the NHS, but also those that are, to help identify and root out those issues. So the reparations also had suggestions, 1 to 14, which was for veterans organisations and other non-governmental organisations, which included advice on inclusion and outreach and staff training, very much along the lines of what was recommended within the NHS section, and also suggestions for the devolved administrations as well, along the very same lines. Next steps, Craig's mentioned reparation 28 and 29. For some reason I put 27 on the slide, ignore that, it's 28 and 29. Work to be done there. Our next steps are more community building. We need far more outreach. It's reaching veterans. The reparations process is only open for a 2-year window, and what we don't want is for veterans on 2 years plus 1 day to say, well, I never heard about this. So it's really important, especially within the next 18, 19, 20 months, that we reach out to as many veterans as possible and raise awareness. Next steps is about just encouraging that inclusion, again through our Pride in Veteran Standards is one way to do it. There's lots of ways to do that, leading to health and well-being improvements for all veterans, really, because a lot of the work we do spotlights areas where organisations might want to adapt their services in other ways as well. And of course, we're working on the history in the archive, and future research will measure all the impacts of this. I'm going to rush through these last few slides because we want to give time for Dave and questions. But we've been very fortunate with the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust providing the veterans Places, Pathways and People programme. And that allowed us to put out regional community workers. So in all 10 regions now, initially 9. So we have a community team manager. We have Dave as our Pride in Veterans Standard manager. And then we have a VCW who's also our operations manager within Scotland, who covers Northern Ireland, Ruth in Wales, and then England is split down into 6 regions, each with their own veterans community worker, who, if you want to engage with Fighting for Pride at a local level, is a really good person to speak to. They're there to support the veterans, outreach, find more veterans, connect them into services, referral pathways, and so on, but also to engage with support services and help them develop their welcome and answer any questions as well. An awesome team. And this is what we do. We bring LGBT veterans back into the military family, and where possible, we want them to be fully included within the military family itself. So not just an LGBT section going off walking in the hills, but we want our veterans to join their own regiments, organisations, ships and squadron organisations, and take part within those. But first, we have to repair all the hurt from their experiences pre and post ban, and give them that reassurance that actually the services welcome them with open arms and want them there as part of the military family and respect their service. We join up with the services whenever we can, so we do Pride in London, and also the marching at the National Cenotaph and the Festival of Remembrance. And there's Vice Admiral Halley, who marched with us in London Pride last year. How can we support? We've got the previous resources. Great. Dave's going to go into that in a little bit more detail, and that gives opportunities for provision of advice and awareness and developing an inclusive welcome. We do an awful lot of engagement and support of different organisations through that and elsewhere using our VCWs, but also we veterans. We've got a huge pool of veterans now, over 800 veterans signed up to us, and we're getting the veterans involved in telling their own stories, because Craig and I tell their stories, but there's nothing more impactful than listening to it directly from one of those veterans, and it's incredible. We can also help by signposting. If you have any veterans, we can help with the signposting into other services. We've got an extensive network of organisations that we work with, hundreds of different organisations, quite literally. The majority of them are connected into veterans organisations in one way or another, and we're developing our database. We're a bit slow off the ground with our database, but it's getting there, and we are building on that. We do hold events, and you're welcome to join us at any of those events. We've got a newsletter and a website, so you can get information about us there. And we're always interested in collaborative projects. So if you've got a project that's ongoing and you want Fighting with Pride to be part of that, then please do reach out to us. And of course, we've got our research and our surveys that we can do to support you with evidence as well. How you can support us, you can just be awesome allies and advocates that you are. You can make sure that your whole team has this awareness, because we always say that if an organisation signs up to Pride in Veterans Standard and the organisation and the people that we speak to are all understanding and get it and they want to change, they're welcome to be seen as being inclusive, but that veteran then knocks on the door and just gets that wrong one person who disagrees with it all, and you'll never see that veteran again. So it's about the whole team having an awareness of why LGBT veterans face these challenges. It's also about your partner organisations as well, making sure that they understand so that they're not letting you down. You can provide your own visible welcome by PIVs, and Dave will talk to you a bit more about that as well. And you can help us with outreach. So whenever you either signposting or using social media and retweeting of tweets, because somebody might know somebody who might know somebody who knows of an LGBT veteran who needs support. Again, you can support us with collaborative projects. So, we might be able to use you on, for instance, in Leeds Pride last year, we had the local Up Courage team on a stall with us. And that was absolutely brilliant. People coming in and learning about mental health within the NHS, as well as about learning about LGBT veterans. You can measure your own impacts of all of these things as well, and you can feed that back to us, so it builds a bigger picture, and we can pass best practices on as we want to, and you can ask us as many questions as you like. I'm going to hand to Dave but before I do that, I'd like to show you, Craig and I would like to show you a quick video of one of our veterans made without our knowledge, and it's a pretty hankies and tissues ready, I think, is the answer to this. One of our veterans who had the most extraordinary challenges with mental health, and she talks about what it means to be connected back to other LGBT veterans and her service respected and the difference it's made on her mental health. And it returned her to photography, and the photographs in this video are all hers. And hopefully it'll play. I haven't said all that. Thank you very much. I'll hand to Dave now for his update on PIVs.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody. I always found that video very powerful, and I guess it really just shows why we all do what we do, and what the impact of doing that can be on veterans. I always seem to have my presentation after that, and it always gets me. So I'm Dave Small. I'm the Proud in Veterans Standard Manager. I joined the Navy at 16, escaped Hull, and joined the Navy at 16. Was in the closet for the majority of my career, came out when the ban lifted, and spent the last 4 years as an out warrant officer, out to some extent within the Navy before leaving in 2004. And then after that, I've really spent most of my career within the EDI environment. So I did work for Stonewall for some years, looking after public sector organisations, particularly quite a large group of NHS organisations. I was also the equality manager at Portsmouth City Council, and then before joining Fighting with Pride, was the equality manager at Portsmouth University. So you can probably guess from that I actually live in Portsmouth. So I was privileged to be able to join Fighting with Pride in my 5th year now, I believe. Initially looking after veterans engagement directly with them, but as we increased our staff pool and we brought in our veteran community workers, I've now been able to move across and support the delivery of our Proud in Veterans standard. As mentioned really before, that there's lots of barriers to LGBT veterans accessing services, and actually some of these barriers are very similar to the LGBT community generally, but some of these are particularly through the lens of the veteran, which are very specific to veterans. One of the main ones is not actually feeling a veteran. So, because of the LGBT veterans experience, many of them don't feel a veteran and therefore wouldn't even contemplate accessing a veteran service. Or they may have engaged many years ago, and at that time, I think, as Craig mentioned, had a very poor or bad experience. And of course, every organisation we work with now wants to be inclusive and would be inclusive, but it's very much about getting that message across to the veterans, that message, getting across that we are, LGBT veteran aware, and we want you to come through the door and you will get a good service when you do so. And also some of our veterans lack confidence in, because of their experiences, because of being closeted for many, many years, about disclosing. And I appreciate that there's not always a reason to disclose, but sometimes it can actually really help with the provision of a service if you are happy to disclose that information about your gender identity or sexual orientation. And many of our veterans lack the confidence in doing that. And really just generally not knowing it's a safe space. And I liked Anna-Marie comment at the very beginning, actually. I scribbled it down quickly because I thought, what a great statement. It was every contact counts, get it right first time. And this is what it's all about. Fighting Pride has 4 goals, and the one that Pride in Veterans Standard sits under is the capacity building, i.e. supporting organisations to offer a warm welcome. Much of Fighting with Pride's work is directly contacting and being in contact with veterans, and a lot of that is signposting to other organisations who will actually deliver the support. And what we wanted to do was make sure that we are able to support organisations in supporting the veteran. Because the worst thing for us would be for us to signpost a veteran to an organisation. That veteran walks through the door and then has a very negative experience, because the courage to go through and walk through that door is immense, and we may never make contact with them again if it's a poor experience. So that was the main reason of bringing in the Pride in Veterans standard. Now, I've worked within HE and the public sector, and I know, there's a lot of charters, a lot of commitments, a lot of audits, and right from the bat, I need to say this isn't an audit. These are the ones on the screen that I've been quite heavily involved in the university, and some of these are reams and reams, 200, 300-page documents that need filling in, lots of spreadsheets. And sometimes you feel actually at the end of the day, you spend more time filling in the audit than actually delivering change within the organisation or making a difference to the individual. So we were very wary of that when we brought this scheme into play. We needed it to be simple for organisations. We'll work with many of the NHS organisations in this room. We'll have thousands of staff, and then we'll also be working with an organisation. It's two people meet on a Thursday in the kitchen, volunteers to deliver some great services to veterans. So we needed it to be able to fit all sizes of organisations, and all sizes of organisations were able to get out of it what they wanted to ensure that they can deliver a good service to veterans. We also wanted it simple for veterans to understand, so they knew what to expect when accessing services. It needed to fit within the resources of Fighting with Pride. There's no cost to being a Pride in Veterans standard organisation. So everything we deliver is within our resources, and therefore we need to manage that and sometimes manage expectations about what we can offer. We didn't want cost to be a barrier to any organisation to join the programme. And of course, it's important that it makes a difference to the veteran. That is the most important thing to us. And it's all about supporting veterans, demonstrating your commitment to inclusion, and making it a safe and friendly environment for LGBT veterans to come in and get the services that they're entitled to. These are the 6 commitments on the screen. I'll let you read through them. When you look at these, many larger institutions and organisations may well deliver to these generally around LGBT equality, LGBT plus equality. But actually what we do is for these, we look through the lens of LGBT plus veterans. And again, depending on the institution or the organisation's size, some of these will be, yes, we do that every day. That's part of our core, but then others, it's all very new to them. So what we say to our organisations who join Pride in Veterans Standard is you commit to these. We totally appreciate that organisations will be on different stages of their inclusion journey. Some will be ticking all these boxes. Some might need a little bit of extra resource, support and guidance to tick this box and to demonstrate that they are delivering to these. And part of being in the programme is that we ask you to tell us what you are doing to deliver to these. But I think, even larger institutions, NHS organisations should never get complacent. I by coincidence, I was 60 and I've just had my 60th health check. So I went to my GP last week for that, and the practitioner was doing the check. And one of the questions was around being married, and I said yes. And then the practitioner said, "Oh, well, how long have you been married to your wife?" And then I said, well, actually, I'm married to a man and we've been together for X amount of years. Now, that wasn't done in a discriminatory way. In fact, the practitioner was very embarrassed and apologetic, and I got that. But it does show that, no matter how much inclusion an organisation is doing, there's always more to learn, and we always need to keep our eye on the ball, particularly when engaging with the LGBT community. Being in the programme is about demonstrating your inclusion, demonstrating that we understand the veteran experience, we understand the impact of the ban, we're ready to provide resource, support and services that are tailored to that need, and that our staff will be understanding and caring, and we are part of, and we understand the Armed Forces Covenant, and that's what you are demonstrating. So, of course, we provide a logo, extremely important, because we need you to be proactive. As I mentioned before, I know every organisation will want every LGBT veteran to come through their door, but there are those barriers I mentioned earlier to veterans doing that. So it is beholden to the organisations to be proactive in demonstrating and saying to these veterans, come through the door. You will have a good experience and we will be able to provide services for you. To help organisations do that, we do deliver some resources within the programme, and we let organisations cherry pick on these because some organisations will want more access to resource than others. So an NHS organisation, for example, might have lots of E&D training, might have lots of really good inclusion policy, whereas a smaller charity, that might be quite new to them. Even an NHS organisation might not have a lot of resource around the LGBT veteran experience, might not have audio or video of veterans talking about that experience, and the resources on our website deliver those. So it's very much around being able to cherry pick what best suits you, and any organisation is able to share that resource within their organisation to broaden the understanding of the LGBT veteran experience and need. I just wanted to share with you some stats. I pulled these off this morning, actually. You know, we're really pleased. The NHS are a real supporter of the Pride in Veterans Standard. We've currently got 161 organisations joined us and working with us. Published sector, that should say public sector. That's my dyslexia coming into play there. So we have 51 organisations from the public sector, which makes up 31% of the total number of PIVs. And actually within that public sector, 35 NHS organisations, which is 69% of the public sector, which is a huge chunk. So, you know, I wanted to thank on this call, you know, the public sector and the NHS organisations who support the programme. If you would like any more information on the programme, I know Anna-Marie is either shared or will share this presentation, and my details are on there, and there's a link to find out more information. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you. And hopefully Anna-Marie's there and she's going to take over the Q&A section.
I am. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much to all of you. I've only just managed to put my tissues down from that video. It struck me in such a visceral way. I had to take a breather. So thank you to the person who shared that. And the photography was beautiful. The words were really, really meaningful. And I know that people on this call will thank them for that as well. So thank you for the presentation. Craig, one of the things I wrote down during that was the phrase hunted people down. I just thought out of everything, that was the kind of phrase that struck me the most, that the narrative around constantly having something or someone behind you questioning, you know, it just, the hunted people down, it really kind of got to me on that level. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and the VCHA will continue to, you know, work with Fighting with Pride, and especially your VCWs regionally. I know our regional leads throughout the country work really, really closely, make sure that the trusts within the NHS know about them. They present quite a lot, I can definitely say, within London. We work very, very closely with Alex and Anthony in the South East. So thank you. But we do have some questions. Do you have any numbers on how many service personnel were forced to leave under the gay ban?
I don't think Caroline and I have agreed who's going to answer what, but I'll go for that one. So just before I answer that, just to your point, Fighting with Pride considers that everybody that served in the armed forces during these years is a victim of the gay ban, including the Special Investigation Branch and the doctors and the nurses who were forced to do difficult things, because we all lived in the same world with the same rhetoric going around. So there was a institutional moral injury to the whole community, and we take no truck with those who were part of the system that chased people, and in fact we have lots and lots of very moving conversations with people who have deep regrets about what they became involved in, and they are some of our strongest supporters. So I just wanted to mention that. It's really difficult to know how many people were affected. The reason for that is that there was a court case going on through the 1990s, and the Ministry of Defence, I think, probably knew that one day there would be a financial account for it. So records were not kept, or records were destroyed, or wherever possible, people were forced to resign so they didn't have to go through the process of throwing people out. So it's been a very difficult thing, and it's an Achilles heel at the moment for the government, because the government genuinely wants to try and quantify its financial commitment to compensation. But until all the people have applied that are eligible, then it's going to be difficult to say. But what we can say is 1,130 people gave evidence to the LGBT Veterans Independent Review. So that's going to be a very significant percentage of this community. We also know that on our books, we have about 850 people on our mailing list. So it's very dangerous to estimate, and I'm only prepared to do it with Caroline, not in the presence of the national press, but I think we're probably talking about more than 1,000 and less than 1,500. It's the best estimate that we can sort of manage.
How do you think the government will deal with those that were discharged for other reasons, but unofficially were forced out because of their sexuality?
Well, I think that comes back to partly what Craig was saying about the records and so on. So because the government has destroyed the records, they're not able to say to an individual who's applying for reparations that you weren't dismissed because you're LGBT plus. So the onus is on the government to do that. So the way they've responded to that is they won't ask for additional evidence from a person who's making a claim against reparations. They will ask for proof of service. So they'll at the moment, the Ministry of Defence Reparations implementation team have been absolutely brilliant. We've been working closely with them for a while now. And so when the reparations was announced on the 13th of December, there was a website provision with a list of all of those that are available now, plus a registration of interest for those that are being worked on this year and into next year. And so when people tick those off and provide the necessary details of when they served and ideally their service number, that is enough evidence for somebody then to have a look at the reparations that they're applying for.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
When it comes to compensation, the financial aspects, then there will be more in there as well, obviously, because then it will be on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. This is for A&E. So as healthcare professionals in A&E, how can we ensure that our support and care for LGBT plus veterans are not only medically comprehensive, but also culturally sensitive, acknowledging the unique challenges they may face and creating a safe space for disclosure of relevant information that could impact their health outcomes? It's quite a large question, but I think it's a really, really important one in kind of like those really fast-paced, busy environments that A&E can kind of lend itself to.
I guess, can I come back just a little bit on that? And I'm sure Caroline and Craig will come back as well. I think Pride in Veterans Standard is part of that, because actually, you know, anybody working in A&E, if they've listened to those stories, they've watched those videos through the resources that are provided, and the organisation can share that within their organisation, you can't help but have a better empathy and understanding of the veteran experience. And I should have also mentioned that actually we're very aware that, you know, particularly the larger NHS organisations will have LGBT staff networks. And it's really important that they engage as well, because there will be veterans working within the NHS who would want to be part of the LGBT network, and been working with PIVs and Fighting with Pride can encourage them to engage in that network, which they might not have wanted to do before.
Thanks, Dad. Couldn't agree more. And I think it's important that staff teams know about the ban, or at least have some awareness. It's 24 years now since the ban was lifted, and awareness of it has to some extent slipped from people's consciousness. It almost sounds like sometimes we're talking about a distant planet or a Margaret Atwood novel or Gilead or something. And people are actually quite astonished when we tell people about this. So I know this is being recorded. If you have an opportunity to show it to your teams, then it can just be that thing that sits in their minds that they can be aware of, so that as clinicians, when you're looking at what the seat of an issue may be, then you can think, oh, hang on a second, they're not just a veteran. This might not have its foundation in Afghanistan or Iraq. It might have its foundations in what happened to them because of the ban. And I think, as Dave said, it's great to have that visible rainbow there. I think it provides amazing reassurance of the fact that you are talking to somebody who will give you full regard and respect the person that you truly are.
And Craig, it's interesting, this knowledge of the ban, it's not just, it's also within the LGBT community as well. You know, a lot of our younger LGBT community have no knowledge of the ban. And when they first hear about it, they just found it unbelievable that that even existed, you know. So it's awareness for everybody of what happened and the impact of that.
But it's also very interesting. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dave. But it's a really interesting story as well. And I think that when people understand the past, they can far more easily value what they have today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so interesting. I left in 2009 and I didn't know about the ban until I was at university. Well, actually, after I left university back in 2018, I believe. I didn't know. I served my whole time and nobody spoke about it. I worked with members of the LGBT plus community on my ship, and it just was not a conversation. Nobody spoke about it. It was never raised by anybody in leadership. It just wasn't a thing. And it's
we are very rare dinosaurs.
Speak for yourself, Craig. Speak for yourself.
There's a question here about you raised it earlier about the NHS Rainbow Badge scheme. How do you feel about the government accessing funding for the NHS Rainbow Badge scheme during LGBTQ plus History Month? The theme of this year is medicine.
Well, I was about to say we don't like to be too political, but actually we do. I think it's a great shame. I think that scheme is really, really important to an organisation that has no other interest than the health and well-being of the people that the NHS serves. And to a very significant number of those people, seeing that rainbow is really, really important. Because it gives them the confidence that they're being delivered a service which is right for them. And perhaps it can improve, I'm sure it improves clinical outcomes by allowing people to be more open about what's going on in their lives, and therefore allowing clinicians to make better assessments on how they can be supported to better health. So a great pity. Let's hope that at some point in the future, perhaps under different circumstances, that the scheme comes back.
Yeah, I completely agree, but also there's an awful lot of messaging coming out of the current government, and the media, which is very negative against the LGBT plus community. And I think it's probably quite deliberate that happened in LGBT History Month. So that's why the opportunity to raise awareness is so important, because if people only see that messaging, and if you read papers like the Telegraph and the Times and places like that, that's the only messaging you'll see, and it help people form an opinion on that. And we're in danger in many ways of going backwards in our inclusion. So I think having the opportunity to raise awareness of people who face this prejudice and discrimination, but were doing such an amazing job in defending their own country, and there are amazing people, adds value to the opposite side of that argument, across the board, whether it's in schools, universities, healthcare establishments, within the military itself, big wherever.
Thank you. One of the questions that I had was around identification. So when working with organisations, one of the things that we come up with against the most is the veterans, they won't tell us. We'll ask the question and they won't identify themselves. Members of all communities within the armed forces community just won't identify themselves. Is there anything tangible that people can do to make LGBT plus veterans feel safer in answering the question if they are asked? Is there a certain way the question can be asked, or is it just a case of creating spaces that have like the rainbow badge or posters around waiting rooms to just kind of like give themselves permission to be able to identify themselves?
Well, I think we can help there a little bit, actually, in that we're one of the key things that we're doing is building back the military identity in our community. We're very keen on it, so we're strongly encouraging our veterans to apply for the new Veterans ID card, for example. And one of our campaigns later on in the year will be to encourage our veterans to flag themselves as veterans on the NHS computer systems, because I think that's really, really important. But it takes time with some of our veterans for them to feel that they want to step into that arena. It still feels a very unsafe place for them. But we'll work hard with that, and we'll do what we can. I think having GP accredited practices is fantastic. Seeing that whenever I go into my surgery, which is GP accredited, which is Armed Forces accredited, I love seeing that poster on the wall, and that type of thing does have an impact. So we'll keep working on that, and we will push our veterans to identify themselves to NHS services.
And we do have some GP practices who are actually signed up to PIBs. We're seeing more individual practices signed up now, which is great. An organisation gets a certificate when they sign up. You know, that in the reception area can be a very powerful message, just seeing that on the wall. You know, you've got to do as much as you can to demonstrate that inclusivity and that readiness to, you know, wanting the veteran to declare. And you know, hopefully then the veteran will at some point, when they feel comfortable and ready, and maybe it might not be the first time when they come in to see you, but once they've been in and they've had a good experience, the next time they come in, they might think, well, actually, this is a safe space and I will talk about this, or I will declare this. And that might be being a veteran, or it might even be declaring as LGBT.
Absolutely. I know we are getting on time, so I just will ask one more question that's just come in. How is the UK being influenced, both in terms of government and culture, by the current challenges in place, like America? And if there is an impact, what measures or initiatives are being implemented to address and counteract these influences?
Gosh.
Right, so that's a Caroline, do you want to go first?
That's quite a big question.
That's a big global question.
It is a big question. I'll kick that off very briefly, and then I'll hand over to Caroline, unless you want to, Caroline. I knew you'd do that. It's a worrying time. There are some curious leadership regimes in the world which seem, for reasons which are not clear, to want to marginalize communities like ours. And some of that influence has without question been felt under the auspices of this current government. I think we all felt that 5, 6, 7 years ago, we'd made incredible progress towards ensuring that people were valued for their unique characteristics, but it feels as though we've gone backwards of late. And I think the greatest concern for the whole of the LGBTQ plus community has been for the trans community, who must at times feel under siege, and as though there is an attempted act of erasure. I think it's really important that we stick together. And the only thing I can say is that let's hope that we end this year with national leadership in place that can be more positive and welcoming, and move us away from where we are at the moment. But it's not the best of times.
No, it's not. And I think the only counter at the moment we have is to raise positive profiles and positive news. And so it's finding ways to do that. Even when you look at some of the messaging which has been in the national press recently, with the open letter from the generals to the Defence Secretary, telling him that all of this diversity inclusion was nonsense, and we're losing, we're not recruiting people, and we're losing our skills as a warfighting force. And actually, they're speaking from the 70s and the 80s, and in their military, women wouldn't be part of it, and LGBT plus people wouldn't be part of it, and you'd have to be connected into the right regiment to be part of it. And that's quite scary, because they're quite influential people now, but it's not their messaging, because everybody looks at that and turns around and says, well, that's old school generals, and they've just been wheeled out from wherever they are, and they've made those comments. But actually, people listen to that because they're hearing all of that other messaging that we're talking about, and it all adds together, and they hear that, and they think the military is weak. But then they think, how on earth do they think that that kind of messaging is going to improve their recruiting? It's not, because they're addressing a different generation of people who understand inclusion, and they won't join an organization if it's not an inclusive, not just even if they're not LGBT plus, but straight youngsters today wouldn't join an organization which wasn't LGBT plus friendly. And so all of these old all this old messaging needs to be shown for what it is, out of date and prehistoric and all the rest of it. And actually, what's wrong with people just being nice to each other? Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, I have done an awful job of hosting this at 9 minutes over. Some more questions are coming through, and I do encourage these questions to keep coming. I will email them over to everyone here to kind of get those answers, and I will publish those when this goes on the YouTube video. I'd like to thank Craig, Caroline and Dave for joining us today. I'd like to thank everybody who joined us, whether live or on YouTube. And I encourage you to please go visit Fighting with Pride and look at the Pride in Veterans Standard. And yeah, thank you from everybody at the VCHA.
And Anna-Marie, thank you for organising this, such a big event. It's not an easy thing to do, but thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy. So thank you all.
We'll speak later. Bye.
Of course, bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.